Yes.
Hello again, Joachim.
Hello again.
You had questions, I believe, about shall we tackle this big question of this
hmm
very, very modern question of the historical Jesus?
hmm
I,
Yes.
I
That's
say I say it's a very modern one, and of course, some people will object. No, no, uh, Christianity is all about this, and yet the very term historical Jesus, the very expression, presupposes that there is such a thing as history, and history is to be understood as universal,
mhm.
independently of a textual point or poetic, literary point of reference
Well,
for
literal means the same thing these days, does it not?
as
As historical.
yeah. Well, actually, I'd say literary.
Yes.
Literal is the classical sense of historical. Historical means uh, on the face value. Yeah, there
Yeah.
it is. Yeah, it's
How the
literary.
fathers
It's
discuss it. Yeah.
literal, and then you have to go deeper into the
hmm
literal
Yes.
to find out the real message. But
Theory, yeah.
okay, yeah.
And allegory.
Yeah, yeah, which is not just a metaphor of the
No, no.
literal, which is this is the way we approach it today in schools. They tell us that that's just a metaphor of the literal, and ultimately the literal is the real, and the science deals with that, whereas religion deals with the metaphorical, with the
hmm
way of speech. Yeah, it's just a manner of speech. A dream, what we would like, the meaning which is inferred, that is dreamed of. But then
Carl
we,
Jung.
but then we have to get back to the real. The real is the literal, the historical. Okay, so that's just to uh, suggest that this expression, historical Jesus, already frames things in a modern way. But raise, please, the questions that you had in mind.
Certainly. Um, well, I think that there is something commonsensical about this modern approach. I put my keys somewhere. I wait a week. Are they still there? No, this requires serious inquiry. Um, to that extent, I think it's that there is something. The idea of events, uh, stuff that happens in front of your eyes that you remember, for instance. Now, of course, the question with this text is that the same thing as writing it down? And what is memory? That's but that's to the side. I mean, because the thing that prompted this is that you said that you were indifferent, agnostic, but certainly indifferent to the question of the historical Socrates. Don't make that face. Um, um, and that
That it wasn't
what?
important. It wasn't important.
Yes, that's so you said. Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't
Um,
important.
and you said the same thing for that the same thing applies to Jesus for as far as you're concerned.
As far as I'm concerned, but not as far as Christians are concerned. As far as
Yes.
I'm concerned, shall we say it, as as a as a man, as a man, not as a man of faith, but just as a man. So if you take the, independently, some people would like to say as a philosopher, as a scientist, as a scholar, it is irrelevant. It is not a big issue, yeah, at all, whether he, um, it. What does it mean? I mean, this whole issue, this whole question of historical Jesus is completely irrelevant because it has to be unpacked. And when you unpack that question, Then you ask, well, what do you mean that the Jesus that we hear about, the one that appears in the Gospels, is the real Jesus? In what way? In the sense that 2021 years ago, oh, more or less, yeah, more or less, because we don't really know, eh? And even scholars, yeah, or I mean, anybody, yeah, will say that yes, well, it was more or less, yeah. So more or less 2,000 years ago, somebody walked and around, yeah, and his name was precisely the one recorded in the Gospels, and everything he did was precisely as recorded in the Gospels. But then we have different versions, and more or less, and these Gospels were written later, okay, after Paul's account, and Paul tells us that he never met good old Jesus physically, but that he saw him in the mind. He had a vision. And that really what really counts is that vision of Jesus. And then we have the stories that somehow are functions of that inner vision. So the outer vision is a function of the inner vision. What is real is the inner vision. What is not so real, or at least what is a shadow of that inner vision, is the outer vision. So, I mean, the outer vision is not that reliable. What is most reliable is the inner vision.
Or as far as study is concerned, you mean?
As far as Paul is concerned. And if you're a Christian, I think that, if you want to dismiss Paul, then what kind of a Christian are you?
Yeah, fair enough.
What is fundamental is the inner vision. That is primary. And the outer vision is a function of, indeed, a kind of shadow of the inner vision. And so the shall we say, the noetic encounter, where to speak in Greek, the noetic, intelligible, intimate encounter with Jesus. That's the fun. That's the one you can't doubt. The others you can doubt. You have various versions, and not for nothing do we have 4 accounts that were left, and there were originally apparently many accounts of the story of Jesus. And so they just reduced them to 4, but 4 is not the account given by God. These are accounts given by man.
It's not a Quran. Yeah.
This is the big difference between Islam text, the Islamic text, the Quran, and the Gospels. The Gospels are admittedly according to somebody. According to somebody. It is a story according to a man. He is a witness. What kind of witness? Somebody who lived after. Was it an apostle? Well, in the popular imagination, I think we can say they're all apostles. Paul is an apostle, the apostle, who never met him physically. So, is it really reliable as if an historical account, as a journalistic account? When we want to know if the media have given us a true story, a true account of what happened. And so we go there and we see, this is not exactly this kind of search for the true account, a modern search, a search we're used to, that we're brought up with as a habit, as a modus operandi also, it's the way we live, is alien to the concerns of the early Christian sources. In fact, of just about all of Christianity prior to modernity. It's alien to it. Maybe even prior to Vatican II. But it's alien to their concerns. Oh, shall we determine, with the German historicist school, shall we determine the exact date? That will make a difference. Is this source historically reliable? Is this what Saint Augustine is really caring about? People say, he is introducing this problem of historical Jesus, of universal history. Is that what he's really interested in? Or is he giving, à la façon of the ancients, a kind of universal picture, metaphorically speaking, in the sense that Rome is universal, that it is universal in the sense that it is a total image of reality, as it were. Yeah? It doesn't mean that there's no people outside of Rome, or physically. So that, I don't know if I've been clear about why this historical question is of little or no importance for me as a scholar, for, I should say, further, for early Christians, frankly. Now, they'll object, oh, but, we really believe that he existed. But is that all that important for Paul? If he is the first one who tells us that what counts is the inner encounter with Jesus. And then he walked, and yes, he lived, and he died for us. Okay, but all of these terms are taken for granted very often. But if you approach these terms seriously, are you not to encounter them as pointers to a meaning that is not obvious? In other words, are you not to then ask yourself, in what context do we hear the speech about his walking on the waters? How are we to understand it? And then all of a sudden you realize that a whole history, as it were, a whole tradition of interpretation suggests very clearly that, oh, there's a meaning, a deeper meaning to this story, which doesn't mean that the poor farmer, the poor shepherd, must be a scholar or must dive into the inner recesses of these terms. No, or that he should be disenchanted and say, no, it's not true. He didn't walk on the waters. No, let him approach the story as well as he can, with the understanding, however, that he should not then close himself to the inner dimension of these terms, and at that point make himself vulnerable to replacing the, shall we say, the authority of the mystics with the authority of the new scientists, who will try to give you the ultimate historical account, the exact scientific account, which will make any openness to the mystical expendable. In fact, passé. It will outdate it. It will say we're replacing that. The older Christians were going from the, shall we say, the pre-scientific literal account, historical account, to the mystical account. We moderns go from the uneducated literal account, right? The Gospels, as you approach them like as they are, to the scientific, and that's why we study the Gospels, to find the ultimate, precise, exact, however you like it, account. So we study the terms and we see where they come from, and then we find, aha, but this must have been the original one, and then the original one is the true one. And the original one, of course, is not the one pertaining to the inner vision, but to a journalistic kind of account. And you say, what's the first one who saw the guy and wrote it down? And then, of course, there's a big problem. Who wrote it down? And what did he really see? Is he reliable or not? Was he a scientist? Was he enrolled in the Academy of journalists at the time, of reliable journalists? What was he doing? Was he trying to give a journalistic account, or was he trying to do what he did, namely to give an account that pointed to a message? And there, the message is what really counts, not the outer appearance, the outer account. This is what I was objecting to, really.
Yes, I pretty much grant all of that. Actually, yes.
No.
So okay, well, I have these questions. So, but I'll try not to be blunt and sort of move with the direction of the conversation. So let me ask this: Are sacraments part of this outer shell? Do they transmit, what is promised by whatever the teaching is, or are they to something that has to be pierced, or what is it, merely received?
The sacrament is precisely the term. It is sacred. Sacred means secret, and secret pertains to the God. It's the same root etymologically. So it is not only the sacrament as such, it is not only and certainly not primarily something that is appearing, that is outward. I mean, obviously, we have Paul's critique of the people who reduce the sacrament to an outer shell. Yeah? So this is not what Christianity's message is about, the facade. Not at all. So but this doesn't mean that he gives up the law, right? As Paul would say, not at all either. It's just that the outer is a kind of, shall we say, platonically again, is a kind of shadow, that an opening, yeah, a doorway through which you enter the inner dimension, the sacred. So it's a sacrament. It's meant to be sacred, so to speak, to play with words. So yes, it's an invitation. You participate and you enter into that world through that portal, as it were.
Yeah, that makes sense. What I'd like to highlight, though, is that the claim, of course, by the church is that the sacraments are traditional. They're traditional, that they're handed down from the good old days.
What's wrong with that?
Well, there's nothing wrong with that, except
Is there a contradiction there?
well, that it means that bears in some way on what moderns concern themselves with as historical, some way.
Okay, but that is not addressed by moderns, because
No, it's not. But
there is shall we say, it has to be credible. The lineage has to be credible.
yes.
But it doesn't mean that it has to be scientifically exact.
No, but
It has to. There is a kind of a resemblance. Yeah, you want to keep this resemblance. It has to make sense that there is a link. I mean, if now, if the Bible says something, about love your neighbor, and now we go to the church class in university, and the professor gives in Marxist, neo-Marxist interpretation of that, or Freudian, telling you that love your neighbor means have sex with him. And this I have attended courses, university courses, where that happened. I think we have discontinuity to the point where it makes no more sense. There's a subversion,
no
an obvious subversion of the whole thing. So, okay, or again, baptism. in the water, and he has to kneel in front of the guy. And I've seen scholars actually arguing that that was a metaphor, and that that was in a sexual initiation. This was in a Bible class that I, in the honors courses that I once took.
It's not very honorable.
And no, it's not. But it's so ridiculous. And then when I challenged, the teacher, asking her, why this approach, why this interpretation, and not others, she said, well, that's the one I picked. Maybe it's popular. It's the most recent one. Okay, so there's discontinuity as I see there. Whereas in the recent church, let's say the Catholic Church, there is continuity of outer shell. And then, I mean, you can argue about this, and there's arguments about. I thank God there are arguments about this, because some will see that there are deviances. Yeah, there's you're undermining that continuity, that common sense of continuity, and for the sake of what? And that suggests, as I said a few minutes ago, that you're taking a modern stance. The modern stance would be that of going not from the common sense layer to a mystical sense, however you understand that, but to go from the common sense to the exact scientific, literal level, which is supposed to make expendable the journey to the inner.
Yes, I see why you find that claim questionable.
Mm.
But what exactly do you mean by common sense here?
What the shepherds would acknowledge. Common sense, sensus communis, is the imagination that is not corrupted by ideologies. Okay, the
Yes.
man left to himself in a village, does not see things as God, but sees things in a wholesome. He's a shepherd. He is not a pervert. He sees things, and no, in spite of what Woody Allen would have us believe, he is not the shepherd. The shepherd is a guy who has his straightforward, as a life, very down to earth approach to life. He is the guy, I don't know, the bus driver in the 50s in rural America. He is a simple guy who is reading the Bible, and okay, he has no pretenses, and he is open to noetic transcendence, to be refined in my terms. He is not prejudiced against it. Yeah? He has no, he might have some suspicion about convoluted, sophisticated talk, but he is not, has not developed any prejudice against wisdom, the inner dimension. He has no prejudice. So he sees things and it's okay. Maybe he has wonder, he has his fears. There are limitations, of course, important limitations about his approach to life. But he sees some injustice, and he has a sense that that isn't really wrong. It is wrong to do certain things, and it is understood without being able necessarily to, and at all, in fact, to really prove that it's wrong. There's certain things that are wrong, and a man of common sense understands that, and the men of common sense agree that certain things, and as to what is wrong, yeah. Of course, today the situation is much more complicated because common sense is corrupted by indoctrination and they try the demagogues, the technocrats try to trample over everything and corrupt or transform common sense and engage it. They start at a very early age. When the child is very small, he will be flattered into his ideological cage. And okay, that makes it a little bit more complicated. But if you stick to farmers who are not watching TV, and there's fewer and fewer today, then you will have more of a sense of what common sense is.
I think that's a commonsensical account of it.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. I cannot prove it scientifically, but if you don't have it, then that it suggests it's not a proof, but it's a sign that you have lost it. That you have lost track of where you're coming from. You know, we all come from that. We're all uneducated when we're born and when we begin growing up, and but then again, in the 1600s, Vico would warn us that if we take a Cartesian approach to education, we will lose that common sense and we will start criticizing before ever asking questions naively. Asking questions before being open to understanding, you will start criticizing. You will start attacking the father before listening to him. And that's the problem of all spoiled brats. We're spoiled brats. We're brought up as spoiled brats who believe themselves to know everything before they even asked.
We don't get the education we have before we're born. I agree.
Okay, it's we're given guns, but before even
Knowing where the trigger is.
yeah, or giving peace a possibility, as it were. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's okay.
The trigger is easier to figure out than peace. That's certainly a whole lot easier. So, all right. Well, so much for common sense then. The reason why I asked about that is because I thought you used the term common sense in the context of transmission. So
That's
I was,
okay.
yeah,
It's okay.
you were, weren't you? Just
Yes,
so
that's okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to ascertain whether you thought in this, according to this view, that is for the peasant or the scholar like trustworthy in that way.
Yes. I mean,
When
mhm.
yeah, when you eat the bread and drink the wine, you think, yeah, all right. So, but
No, the bread. There's many approaches to that. I mean, uh, say for example, how do you explain that to children? Well, um, I personally had no difficulty in my children understanding something about it when I told them, look, this food that is on your table, that you have before you, is your bread, your daily bread, yes? And your father is giving it to you. However, he is not giving it to you so you do whatever the heck you want, you feel like doing with it. He is giving it to you for a reason. Now, that reason is within the bread itself. Now, what does your father want? He wants you to rise to the level of your father. So your father descends within the bread as that reason, as it were. And he is giving you this bread as the food that will help you rise to back to the Father. In other words, to do what is good. That end is within the bread for you to be to discover it. And how do you discover it? By eating it. When you bring it within you, your job, however, your job is to transform that bread through your whatever you want to call it, yeah, into good behavior, good actions. Now, these good actions are the path goes back to the Father. So there you have it. You begin to understand that that is not just bread,
Oh, pardon.
but your Father is within it.
How should I understand that in grown-up boy terms? Yeah, is the real presence in this offering? Is that the intention that the Father has?
But indeed, it is more than a psychological intention that is attributed, yeah, to the bread. So, okay, why is it, a justification of the bread being there? There would not be, and this is the mystical dimension, there would not be any bread if there were no reason for it to be there in the first place. So, how do you explain that? If I were to write the Bible in the terms the common sense terms that I propose to the children, the scholar would come around and say, well, that's just your intention, an intention that you attribute to the bread. The bread would be there anyway, and he can do whatever he wants with it. But the Bible's message is another. The Bible is telling you that there would not be any bread if there were no reason within it. In other words, the bread itself is not just bread. There is an inner dimension to it. It is something else, ultimately.
You were saying that if not for the intention, there would be no bread. I presume you mean in the Eucharist, or do you
Yes,
mean generally?
yes, but
Oh,
the Eucharist in general, the Eucharist is a paradigm of reality. It is there to be teaching you that everything is that way. It is not just one moment and then you move on. No?
to the saeculum or something.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that that everything is that way. Who was it who said that faith is either everything or nothing? But I mean, or something to that effect. So it is either about everything or it's about nothing. It's
Yeah,
not that,
I grasp that meaning.
uh, so okay, yeah. And it has to be also about the bread that is given to the child, and it has to, when we speak about the Father, it has to be about Father in the plebeian or commonsensical sense of the term as well. And when we say that everything comes from through the Father or from the Father, through, yes, yes, for the child, that is what it means. For the scholar, it means something more sophisticated, but for the child, that is real. Indeed, everything comes from and through the Father, who gives him, who provides, and who ultimately relates to him through the Logos. It is through the Word of the Father that you really ultimately relate to the Father. Your real bond to your Father is not ultimate, is not physical. It is of a mental nature. And it comes through the Logos. It is through the speech that you understand your Father, not so much as through physical appearances, although he might, you want to keep a sense of dignity as a father to show the child that you are the authority. But ultimately, you how do you educate you? How do you raise your child? It is through your speech.
Hmm.
And the Logos comes directly, is generated, as it were, out of the Father. It is not something separate from the Father.
Yes.
So, so there is definitely a common sense dimension to the Christian discourse.
And there's also an admonition to be as children
Yeah,
to the Father, presumably.
yes, yes, yes. I mean, you can't be a father and a child at the same time. But yes, I mean, to clearly, I mean, the whole, if you're talking about the question of meekness that we find in the Bible, the question of, you know, being as sheep, as it were, that does not mean in serious terms. Yeah, it does not mean that one is to be play the victim in life. Yeah, that would be a very silly approach to this. It simply means that one is to um, be open in order to receive. And you cannot be open if you have prejudices. And children don't have prejudices. They haven't developed them yet, in spite of what they're trying to do nowadays, raise them through prejudices, through answers, and so that children will never even begin asking questions. This is the whole point of contemporary pseudo education.
They will develop a prejudice towards sugar.
It's all based on
Might be innate.
answers that don't presuppose any questions, they presuppose the absence
Mm-hmm.
of questions. So why do we have to accept these scientific answers? Because there's no inner dimension to common sense. We accept modern science because there is no inner, to go back to what I was telling you before. So you go from the literal commonsensical to the scientific literal, in which will show you that the other mystical, the inner dimension, was just a mirage. So the old questions are useless since we have
Just
the
as your
new
common
answers.
sense, by the way, your common sense also is defied by this.
Yeah, it begs for, according to them, for the intervention of the scientific, which crowns it. In fact, it transforms it. Indeed, however, it in reality it suppresses it, it smothers it, and it tries to uproot it from the mystical, from the inner resources, and transfer it onto a plane of artifice where everyone is as dead leaves driven by the wind, as by a storm, as in an old Dantesque image. And it is the ideology that drives everything. This is incidentally what we find in the Russian critiques of socialism, this uprooting of man, where ultimately man, and this is Machiavellian as well, is Machiavellian. Uh, you, you live best by disconnecting yourself from eternal questions. The problem of eternity is out of the window unless it's symbolically understood. Why? That will enable us to deal more effectively, efficiently with our problems. We see this in this the whole circus of the COVIDism, shall we call it COVIDism, as a kind of doctrine. And in the COVIDism, in COVIDism, we see that we are to rely on the discourse of very sophisticated people, never mind the fact that they contradict each other all the time, that they admit that what they say is just valid for the moment, and then tomorrow they might say something else. But that is a discourse that is supposed to be all grounding. No reference to an other dimension is allowed. We are to
COVID,
move.
according to Fauci.
Yes, we are to move from our wretched situation, but you see now this kind of a deviation and corruption, if you like, or also pedantic take on Christianity. We are in a very bleak situation. We're ignorant. We are pieces of meat, literally. And we need the intervention of this caste that will save us from our condition of mortality, of vulnerability, where there is, of course, there's no providence, zero providence, because there's zero inner dimension. There's zero mystical dimension. So we move from this manner that we're born in and as, and we are purified, saved by, clinically saved, purified, cleansed of our manure-like nature into this laboratory-like world in which everything is controlled, everything is clean, everything is neutered, everyone is castrated, everyone is lobotomized, and everything is beautiful and perfect. This is the white sepulcher on steroids, the white sepulcher of the Bible, where he says, "So you're taking care of your own graves. You're cleaning your graves. What are you doing there?" You know? But this is on steroids because it's the whole world that is perfectly clean, perfectly shiny, and people are perfectly dead spiritually. They are images. They're determinations within a system that wants to determine everything. They're mere determinations. This is the antithesis, if you like, of I think of Christianity. You could say, yeah? Although it relies on Christianity at first.
Mm. How did we get to this COVID stuff?
Oh, but it's a question of the scientific approach to common
Oh
sense.
yes, common sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It exemplifies, COVIDism exemplifies this modernist impulse, which is Machiavellian impulse to
Oh yeah.
solve all problems.
I suppose it's the problems that are the closest thing to being conceived of as eternal.
The
The difficulty in all endeavors.
Well,
you will have resistance.
Yeah, the problems are not meant to be. In other words, we have to solve all problems suggest that problems are understood in a very technical manner. Our mistake is to confront them. You see, we're utterly inadequate when we're pre-scientific, as it were. We're utterly inadequate, and because we we're there to confront problems in a commonsensical manner, yeah, with the imagination, yeah? And we're open to some kind of a inner dimension, and we start asking questions about meaning. Whereas science, the new science tells us that those questions are the wrong questions. You shouldn't be asking about the why of the bread. There is no father in the bread. No, there's no divinity in that bread. This is a stupid question. The problem of the meaning of the bread is a stupid question. We have to weigh the bread, examine its molecular structure, invite it in a laboratory, and manipulate it as a piece of stuff, res extensa. And by doing this, we can start asking the right questions. How can we transform it? How can we, questions about power, about capacity. Can we do it? Not should we do it. If we can, it's perfectly fine to do it. If we can.
It turns out the answer is often yes.
As long as we can, why not? Because this is a progressive drive towards.
Yeah, but I mean the answer to the question of can we seems
Yes.
often to be yes.
Well, not yet. In many cases, not yet. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's always a new question.
Can we convert an old man into a baby?
At some point, no doubt.
I don't know. I have my doubts. I have my doubts.
I mean, it may not be what you expect. It may not be. It may be a baby
Okay, yes, well, we can lobotomize him. But, I mean, can we, is the error of time reversible for the human being? What about memory? Okay, I mean, you can be, looking at things through the lenses of the technocrat, and say, well, memory is just about these neurons, and we can. But now the answer to that, the objection to that, the classical objection to that, is that they're looking at signs and they think they're the reason. A sign is not the reason. The reason comes before what you see. The sign comes after. So when they're saying, I see it's funny, this neighbor of mine says, repeats what she's heard. And she says, well, why do men act this way? Maybe it's their hormones. And I answer, their testosterone. And I answer, well, no. They have testosterone because they're men. It's not that they're men because they have testosterone. Okay. So there's something more fundamental. The testosterone is a sign that they're men. It is not the reason why it's not what makes them men. Okay. And just to refer to an old friend of mine, Vico, from the 1700s, who, he stresses stringently this problem with modern doctrines. They mistake the reason for the sign, and the sign for the reason. Okay, the sign for the reason. Descartes, when he says, cogito ergo sum, he mistakes the sign for the reason. Aside from the fact that sum is only what God says, you are always somewhere. You're not just being. You're always somewhere. So you don't say I am, but I am somewhere. I am there, I'm here, right? However, linguistically, you want to formulate that. Ooh, we have another participant here. Perhaps.
Special guest.
Special guest. If he's special guest, herzlich willkommen.
Comment ça va?
Hi.
Paul.
Hello.
Welcome.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, we've been speaking about this wonderful world we live in.
Yeah.
And the way we are invited in also caring manner to rise from the level of common sense into a world, a clinical world, in which all problems are settled by the new science, and in which the question of meaning disappears, and the question of technical question of what we can do is the only question remaining. And for that, we need more tools, more instruments, or as an ex-president of the United States put it, what are the fundamental, when somebody asked him, what are the problems, the fundamental problems with American education, he answers 3. Okay, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do? He says, what we need is this. So implicitly, the problem is that we don't have these 3. We need more schools, we need more teachers, and we need more computers. Now, Monsieur Obama, I think, here represented technocracy. Okay, so the modernism in its magnificent glory. We need tools, we need more power, We don't need to open up our common sense, our imagination to what is more fundamental, namely the question of meaning. Okay.
Well, modernism run wild.
Modernism.
Not necessarily. I mean, it's a question, not necessarily modernism in itself.
Well, I would say modernism in the respect that if we go back to the sources of modernity, we see a drive. What is essentially modern? Modernist. What is essentially, because modernism at first relies on classical teachers. That's clear. Yeah, if you go to Montesquieu, if you go to Machiavelli himself, is a beautiful writer. It's wonderful things that he writes, and he relies. He has studied. Even Spinoza has studied classical sources, for goodness sake. So there are elements, there are aspects of their writings and of their teachings that are classical. However, that is not peculiar to them by definition. What is innovative is something that is not compatible, I would argue, with the classical sources that they learned from. Now, that has to do with turn away from the question of meaning as understood by the classics, that is to say, not symbolically. So today we will speak about, in the case of religion, we will speak about science telling you what is real, and religion, so the facts, and then religion will speculate about the meaning. Now, you can speculate as much as you want, but then you have to come back to the raw facts, the bread, as we were saying before. So this is against the question of the Eucharist, which indicates that the bread is not just bread. It's always presupposing an inner meaning. That inner meaning is thrown out of the window. Now it's replaced with symbolic meanings that are given to, well, comfort us, to console us in our misery. But then we have to come back to science. So when we deal with COVID in the religion of COVIDism, or in the doctrine or the ideology of COVIDism, rather, when we deal with COVID, what do? Should we be like those voodoo guys who pray, who seek the meaning of life? No, we have to deal with it scientifically first. Then, if we have time, we will go speculate about the meaning of things, religion and whatever else.
Well, it's even worse than that, because we, the scientists, I call them priests of this thing, they determine the meaning. They don't seek the meaning, they determine it. We take control of our own evolution.
You should be careful when you speak, utter their name. What do they usually say after mentioning the prophet? May God be with him, something like that. Yeah.
I prefer God rest their soul.
Rest in peace.
Yes.
And the sooner the better.
Yes. Or what was that line also that in the fiddler on the roof? May God keep him, and then away from us. Yes.
Let's go with that one.
Yeah. Now, Paul, it is fair, yes, to acknowledge that they don't really get rid of the question of meaning altogether. They're simply projecting it into an asymptomatic future. So they will suggest, and this is a whole modern project, all the way into Hegel. They can't get away from the problem of meaning, the problem of semantics. Meaning is simply projected, postponed. So we are working towards meaning, towards the creation of meaning. So in a way, what is meaningful is to work towards the creation of meaning. Yeah. So yes, but in everyday, consciousness of things, most people are not aware of this. So it's sort of in the background of what they're doing. Sometimes it's hard to understand it. They'll just say, look, these questions of meaning are, they're superstructures. We have to deal with facts. Now we're going to die. And so we have to, who do we go to? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? We have to be responsible. What are we going to do? We have to listen to the scientists. Which ones? Of course, the ones that work with the government. Of course, the authoritative ones. Of course, the official ones. The ones who have the money and the power, who are given the grants. Of course.
Yes, because
What else?
success defines reality. It's like
Yeah.
evolution.
Yes, I had a relative who just told me, oh, just saw that they sent me a book, a volume published by SUNY, State University of New York, where there's an article of mine, a chapter, an important chapter. It's an article on Dante. So, oh, she says, I'm so it's this is a New York State that has published your article, huh? So the implication.
So it becomes.
Yeah. Now
It starts to become real.
Yes. What do you
Without
mean?
that, it's not real.
No, it is nonsense.
Well, before I heard this, I thought you were kind of a nutbag. I was about ready to hang up till I heard
That's
that.
it.
New
Yes.
York? Hey,
Yeah.
hey, you talking to me?
So when you wear the crown, that makes you what you say credible. If you take your crown off, that is not credible. And we were, since with Joachim, we were speaking about Christianity. This is, I would say, that this is utterly contrary to the Christian message of Jesus being naked.
Yeah.
He has no power. So if you accept truth because it has power, then you are de facto, in fact, by that very fact, you are rejecting truth. You're just pretending, and you are then an impostor. You are an imposter, and an imposter. You are a fake, and we know what Dante. And this is what Dante is rejecting, incidentally, in Inferno. At the bottom of this Inferno, there's an imposture. There's an imposture. Those who have betrayed truth, by turning it into a function of power. That's an utterly unchristian and anti-Christian way of life. That's if you want to stick to Christianity, but it's also the enemy of common sense.
Yeah, that to me is the most exasperating aspect of what's going on, because I actually don't care what they do to me. They'll come, they'll drag me off.
Don't say that.
Well, that's how I feel, and they're already doing
Reverse
nasty
psychology
things.
Doesn't work
What?
on people who don't have a soul.
Or
there I go again.
Or if I may, to echo Churchill, that argument worked with the British, but it will not work with Hitler.
What argument?
The position you were outlining. In other words, I don't care
what I'm saying is that,
I don't care what experiments you perform on me for the greater good.
It's not that I don't care, but
okay.
I'm
not going to submit.
It bugs me, but I know that ultimately I'm overpowered. But what really bothers me is the lies. That's what I can't stand. That's what that's what
Okay,
bugs me.
okay, but
I can put up with the rest of it, but I can't put up with the lies.
the
Every
lies.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for instance, to me, the worst thing in all this is the mask rule, because it's you must live a lie.
Yes. Yes, but the lie is not the bottom rock. It is the imposture, I should say. Even in a way, the lie is a predicate of the imposture. There is an attempt to replace uh, substantive truth with truth as a function of power. And this imposture produces the lies. And it's an irony, again, we can all smile about it in a way. It's an irony that one of these lies is literally a mask. Because this whole thing is a farce, is an imposture.
It's a masquerade.
It's a masquerade. Yes, masquerade. But so the problem I stopped dealing with almost at the beginning. As you know, probably I had these little interventions on videos with the lies, showing that there were obvious lies. I stopped with that because I made the point: if we just remain on the level of lies, then we'll be fighting. Say, for data, look this data, look at that data, and then they will come up with new data, and this will all be a distraction. You have to get back to the bottom rock, and the bottom rock is the imposture. What the heck are we standing for? What is the point of our life? What do we really stand for? And then I appreciate those who will say, well, do you really stand for security or for liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Oh, nice terms, yeah. Is that what life is about? Or is it about finding your determination in a cage, being determined by the technocrats into your cage and stay safe as long as you don't croak? And then you kick
it's becoming clearer and clearer that the only way to stay safe is to stay out of their way.
Well, we do need masks. We should have not. People should have started by covering their ears, because the virus comes through the ears. There is a hole there. It comes through the ears.
Oh, maybe that has to do with the idea of we are the virus. It's the logos that's the problem.
This is clearly at the beginning of the circus. I said, a man as to sort of echo Hobbes. Man is a virus for another. Yeah, we're viruses to each other. So yes, man is the virus. The man in its commonsensical natural constitution is the problem. We're not supposed to be exposed to problems such as viruses. We're supposed to be transplanted into this what is it, 2001 Kubrick film, where at the end he finds himself into this empty room. If you remember the scene. So it's all very clinical. We're not supposed to be ourselves. We're supposed to be cybernetic entities in a laboratory world. The world turned into a laboratory. Now, the world turned into a laboratory. And we're supposed to have a chip in our head, in our wrist, and whatever. And it's wonderful. Let's go for it. They have these educational videos with millions of people watching, millions, teaching you that if they get this chip in your arm, they can bypass the natural response of the arm to your intentions, and they can have this arm move without your asking it to move. And this is wonderful. Technology does that for us.
Yeah. Doc Ock from Spider-Man. You said that in the the new science, the new natural science, there was an abstraction from a meaning, and you related that it says coeval with the denial of providence, so that providence seemed to be somehow very much connected to inner meaning. Now, I had thoughts recently about that, but I'd like to know how you conceive of that connection. because providence ordinarily understood these days, at least, as a kind of, let's say, providing for one's well-being, which is of course conceived of as having John Locke, when he says there's no providence, it means you got to work. And
Yes.
he
Yeah,
has
provide
this
for your,
clever,
yes. Yes. The providential state also, yeah, as in okay, socialist state. Yes, there's a new providence, of course.
yeah,
In I'm speaking in really commonsensical terms. Yeah, you've had a shift with the modern world from looking up to the binomial of providence and prudence. So Platonism as a kind of serious, rigorous, systematic, teleological defense of common sense stands for providence and prudence, is a defense of providence and prudence. Okay, against this alliance of providence and prudence, divine providence, human prudence, we have a Machiavellian alliance of chaos and ruse, cunning. So the new prudence, of course, Machiavelli speaks about prudence, but in this new sense, as ruse, as cunning, because it is cut off from fundamental eternal questions. The new ruse presupposes that the world is a world of facts, of res extensa, devoid of inner support, meaningful support. Okay? If you go to the inner dimension of man, you're simply opening up the flesh and looking for particles. Okay? So, at this point, you can ask, as we had with Paul, is meaning completely out of the window? Well, no, there is a new meaning that is in the making. Okay?
yeah.
So the new providence is the providence that we make. It is not something that supports and confirms prudence. It is not something seated at the heart of prudence and supporting it. Okay? Prudence would be, for the classics, particular providence, if I may venture into saying this. Sometimes it's between the lines, but that's what it means. Virtue is prudence. The prudence is the what a man can be proud of, what an honest man can be proud of. His daily life. He takes care of things. In, shall we say, in the human world, right? No God will give me food if I don't get up and take care of myself. I have to go get the food, feed myself. But I do that prudentially, open, when in full openness and recognition that my capacity to fetch the
Yes.
food is grounded in a divine meaning.
Precisely.
Okay, so this providence, however, that it relies upon is a general providence. So we have general providence and particular providence. Both are real. However, they should not be misconstrued as these terms, as suggesting that we just sit down and then God will give us food. No, no, I have to take care of myself. But always I have to go forward, but always through and by going backward. In other words, by turning backward, I can move forward. I don't go backward, however, again, to use providence for my own means, for my own goals, shall we say. So as a means for my own to achieve power, let's say, right, to go forward. This is again is a modern twist on the classics. No, I go backward to go back, but to understand the point of going forward. What is the point of eating? Is to go back. So there is a kind of cyclical structure to human life and the human world for the classics, and that it has to do with that.
So going back after eating would be, let's say,
Eating for the purpose of going back.
Yes, but going back means something like philosophizing, being virtuous, something like that.
Eating understood as just the shadow of the life of return, the life that is nourished by its foundation.
Yeah.
The true food is the food of the soul. So the fact that I'm eating this piece of bread is just a shadow that yes. reminds me. I remind myself, given the fact that I've fallen into this world, as it were. It reminds me through this bread. It reminds a reminder, a shadow that reminds me, that points me back and to the real problems, and the real food is the problems. The problems are not supposed to be settled, smothered, replaced, overcome. The problems are there as nourishment for the soul. They're good. They're good. But so then there's deviation.
By problems, you would mean, let's say, what is beauty?
Oh, that is a formula, yeah. But problems, as also you would have to say, transliteral problems that are not mere formulations. You know, I was in Cambridge, no, in Oxford, and this lady who was from Cambridge, she was trying to settle the matter of I believe of Platonism or whatnot, of philosophy, and said, well, look, or of education, and said, look, education in school, how do we know if we have a good program? And a good program must ask these questions. And she had her shopping list. You know, if we deal with these questions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in your decalogue, then we know that this is good education. What if you change the question and the formulation? Yeah, she was again trying to settle the matter scientifically. She was not allowing for she was mistaking a formula, linguistic formula for the real problem. Sure, you can approach it that way. What is the problem of beauty? But that sounds so abstract, you know.
Yes, but there is something that we encounter in life as, let's say, the noble.
Yes.
Just wondering whether that's what you mean by problem.
Problems are the problems, again, that we face on the level of common sense, injustice. We encounter problems first as that. And there's something wrong. There's something wrong. That's why I move. I move because there is an inadequacy. There's a problem. Yeah, that's why I move. That's why I breathe. If I did not have a problem, I wouldn't breathe. I wouldn't have to live on. I wouldn't do anything. But it's because I would go into infinity, you know. But because there is a problem, because there's an obstacle, then I move. And you see me moving.
Yes, I see.
I'm finite.
So by a realm of problems, as you've put it. I think, was it in the On Tyranny interview? By realm of problems, you mean life?
Yeah, I mean, sure, but I mean, life is a big question. What is life?
Yes. Daily life, let
Yeah,
us
I
say
mean,
then.
okay, daily life, then we're going back on the historical life, the superficial life. Superficial life is a superficial dimension of problems. But
Where you have,
what underlies that superficial dimension of problems are problems themselves. So, for example, what are the
okay.
problems that people face today? Oh, as I mentioned, okay, what are the problems of education? So, Mr. Obama said we need more schools, more teachers, and more
Hmm.
computers.
Okay, I see.
What if the teachers were ideologues?
Yeah.
We don't want them. Get fewer. We have too many teachers.
And
And
and and and, and the underworld of that problem is
the
what
real
the hell do you
problems.
teach people?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. The substance. What is the
Yeah.
real problem? The real problem is not that. The real problem is that schools have become marketplaces for ideologues. That the teachers are technocrats. That the instruments of education are no longer books, but computers that make students believe that reality is on a screen, that is all virtual. Um, and so, for to alienate people from the real communities and real contact, we can have this conversation because you have had a real relation with your father first. We wouldn't be able to correspond this way, or on the phone and a letter, even on a letter, if we had not had an oral development. We need for a concrete, commonsensical, and then we can work on a more, we can work with abstract, virtual means of communication. We can transcend that because we found our way through. We're following the logos, yeah, and not without being seduced by the tools that are supposed to replace it. So we make ends meet. We use, for example, this platform against the grain of the reason why it's there, why it was set up. It
Yeah.
was not set up for this, obviously. It was set up for those videos that have millions of people listening,
Yeah.
or zombies, or whatever
Okay, Marco, last chance to put on your gaming headphones now.
it is.
Last chance to
Yes,
put on your headset.
yes, yes, yes. And the virtual reality thing.
Mm,
Okay, so yes, there you have it.
I see. Well, yeah, that's that. I guess I can relate that to my own. I wasn't always a philosophical. I won't call myself a philosopher, but I'm a student. I wasn't always a student. Not when I was in school, certainly. Um, one had these hopes, let's say, and that's, I guess that's a part of the surface problems, as you call them here.
Mhm. Yes, I mean,
We
we feel that, look, I mean, as children, we feel that something's wrong, something's
Mhm.
not right, something's not
Yeah,
right. And we cry, we don't know how to face the problems. We assume that the problem is that I don't have enough toys. I don't have what
yeah.
he has. And I don't deserve what I get. And,
Hmm.
obviously there's something wrong. Yeah.
It's got to be right though, right?
I want it to be right. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know what that means.
Yes. Well, you might think,
And you try and it doesn't work.
Yep.
And at first you might think, okay, somebody's correcting me, that's wrong. Somebody's flattering me, that's right. I like that. It's sweet. That's bad. That's bad. So finally, Pinocchio realizes that Geppetto was right all along. Um, okay, in the story of Collodi, he manages to overcome the objections, but sometimes it's too late. Sometimes we make bad choices, and finally we end up destroying our lives. And In fact, most of the time, most people do. And so we have Dante showing us that most people in hell, in a corrupt world, live, sort of move as shadows that don't deserve a name. Okay, they're ghosts. These are the hordes of zombies, of ghosts, of shadows in the world, and very few people deserve to his address, and so he addresses them, and he tries to bring him out of this world, and it's a relay, as I pointed out in an interview. He picks up what they're trying to do and carries it out with dignity, showing that it has dignity and that they don't deserve to be in that world. Yeah, that's where we are. Our job as children is not to solve our problems, is to get strong, to face those problems. And every time we face them, instead of running away from them, we get stronger. And as we get stronger, we learn how to discover problems, not as something superficial, but as something fundamental that supports us, that gives us strength. The world is not there to please us. It is fundamentally there to bring us back to the eternal. We pick up on aspects of problems, not new problems, aspects of the same problems that help us get back to the problems. Yeah?
And ultimately,
Yeah.
through that, return to?
Well, return to the problems, to the source of the problems, which turn out to be the real problems. And the real problems are forms of intelligibility.
But that's interesting. So you don't say that the problems bear on forms of intelligibility. You say that that's what they are.
Oh yeah, yeah. Fundamentally, yes. So that there are spheres of forms of intelligibility. The spheres, the heavenly spheres. They're places where there is thought, where thought thrives. Thought thrives. Not where there are no problems, but where there are now problems, not in this literal, simplistic way. Let us say I am thrown into a death camp. Yes, I mean that is an oppressive problem that stifles thought and communication. I am ready to be thrown into a gas chamber. That is not a problem conducive to a thought, but it is a shadow of the problems. Now, if I can get my butt out of there and think about, oh my goodness, you see, the world is filled with evil. Okay, now I start to wonder why. Where does it come from? Let us start going back to the source. Then at some point you realize with Dante again, there is a problem of determination. The mind is strangled, thought is strangled into determinations. Now that is a problem. But through this determination, through the very problem of determination, the very problem of determination becomes a passage to open myself to the undetermined, to thought again, to the heavens of thought. And this happens in the Dante's Inferno. At the bottom of determinations, there is this Beelzebub. And through him, he becomes an inert passage a monstrous but yet inert passage to the openness, to the other side, which is the other dimension, where you open to the heavens of contemplation, so of thought. Now you begin to live and to see things on the other side, as it were, of the mirror, and to see that, oh, you approach, you're no longer tormented by, if you can get out of that gas chamber, by the way, you're no longer tormented. You find your way out, if you can, otherwise you're stuck. But if you can, you're no longer tormented by problems. Now you help people see that problems what we consider to be problems are simply distractions from the real problems. Distractions from the gas chamber is a distraction. The real problem is not the gas chamber, it's the reason why it's there. And the reason it's there is the real problem. Now, the real problem was that there was a strangling of the mind, a strangling of thought into a determination, an attempt to solve all problems, to determine life. And indeed, the Nazi would want to solve the problem once and for all. That is the diabolical passage. And it is the point of this determination becomes the problem that you want to flip over in order to return to real problems and to see that the world is filled with intelligibility. You are there to explore and to see things in the light of mystery, the mystery of being. Everything now bespeaks not Beelzebub, because in Inferno, everything bespeaks Beelzebub. That's the source of all this nonsense. Everything will bespeak the good. That's the good life. The life where everything bespeaks, all problems bespeak the good. It's an inverted world we're living in now. Now we're living in an inverted world. If we can get through it to the bottom of it, to this first determination, we can begin living the real life, the good life. And there's a conversion there. If you want to speak in Paul's terms, there you have another conversion. There are conversions that we have to convert in order to be happy. If we don't, we'll remain miserable, stuck into this world. We look at the news and we say, oh, look at the problems, the problems, the problems. No, those are not the real problems. Those are shadows of problems.
I see.
Now, if somebody could accuse you of, oh, that's philosophy. I don't know. But, I mean, if you want to be stuck with appearances, all the more where the appearances are handed over by ideologues. If you want to be miserable and hunt, just race after chase the latest news and remain in that vortex and spin around. You're not really caring about reality. You want to kill, or do you care about what is really real? Well, then you should go back to this source of this world of abominations, because it is a world where we live in, a world of abominations. And Beelzebub is the consummate abomination. Literally, it goes against the human. And now today they've exposed it. We live in transhumanist times. This is an abomination. It goes against the against the man. Abba, against the man. That's, I think, where we live now. And there is a way out.
Which is available to man as man.
Yavul. Yes.
The heroism of Cervantes. The
Yes.
heroism of Cervantes.
Cervantes, yes, as we suggested in our previous meeting. Yes, yes, yes.
Which is to say to make an
Live,
fire-
to live as a man. To live as a man. To live in such a way as to deserve being proud. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to be. You can be proud of it. Yeah, but if you cannot be proud of what you're doing, justly proud, that is not the life of a man. When you go at the end of the day and you say, well, how did I live my life today? Can I be proud of it? Oh, but I earned $5 million. Okay, I did it by taking them away from starving people. Can I be proud of that? But I was pretty cunning in doing that. But can I be really proud of that? Well, I got good grades in school. Yeah, maybe that's better. Yeah, but what were you studying? Oh, I don't know. I mean, is it something good? I cannot say. Well, then, before being proud of that, let us ask if it was good or not. Because Nazi trains ran on track, on time. Yeah?
they ran on tracks too, presumably.
Yes, 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 yes. And they were all on track. Everybody was on track. But was it good? I don't know. Okay, ask that question first. So Socrates asked that question first, not at the end. He doesn't try to build a tower and then ask himself whether it was good or not. First, he asked that question. So first, ask the question of the soul. Okay. So if you engage in that kind of dialogue, if you're open to that kind of exposure, then you're an honest man. If you don't, you're a crook, and you're destined. You're destining yourself for hell.